Everyone believes money was invented to make trade easier, to free us from the chaos of barter. But the truth is, money was never about freedom, it was about control. From the first stamped coins in Lydia to the digital balances glowing on your banking app, every upgrade in convenience has quietly tightened the same invisible leash. You think you own your money. You don't. It's a permission slip, issued by someone else's system, revoked at will. The modern world runs on that illusion, the belief that the digits in your account represent stored effort, when in fact they represent debt. Someone else's liability is pretending to be your asset, and that trick, that elegant inversion, is the foundation of a system designed not to serve you, but to use you. Look back. The medieval peasant paid the lord in grain, then in silver. The industrial worker was paid in notes, then taxed back into obedience. Today, you're paid in digital credits, created by central banks and commercial banks with a few keystrokes. And the moment you spend them, the system tracks, measures, and reclaims them through prices, taxes, and inflation. You run faster, produce more, save harder, and yet the finish line keeps moving. That's not an accident, it's design. The paradox is this: every time humanity tried to liberate money, paper instead of metal, credit instead of coin, digital instead of paper, the architects of the system used that very innovation to build a higher wall around us. They promised liquidity and gave dependency. They promised growth and delivered servitude. By the 20th century, the old chains of empire were replaced by new ones made of numbers. Bretton Woods in 1944, the dollar-gold link, the IMF and World Bank. Institutions that looked like peace treaties, but acted like global ledgers of obedience. A few signatures in New Hampshire redefined who could print wealth and who must borrow it. And you? You were born into that architecture, told it was the economy, as if it were nature, not design. But systems, like empires, are built by someone. And this one was built so you could never leave without starting from zero. Arithmetic doesn't lie. Freedom measured in credit is not freedom at all. If this made you look at your money differently, comment where you're watching from. To understand how this system was built, we have to travel back, not to Wall Street or the 20th century, but to the quiet rooms where the first real power over money was claimed. Picture London, 1694. Britain is at war with France. The treasury is broke. The king, William III, is desperate for funds. Enter a group of merchants and goldsmiths who make an offer that will change the world. We will lend the crown the money, if you let us create it first. That is how the Bank of England was born, not as a vault of gold, but as a factory of promises. The bank would issue notes, pieces of paper claiming to represent gold, and lend them to the state. Those notes began to circulate as money. The trick was simple but revolutionary. Money no longer needed to exist before being spent. It could be created through debt. From that moment on, the world's richest empire was financed not by treasure, but by credit. And this new model spread like fire through the age of empires. France copied it. Holland perfected it. The Rothschilds industrialized it. By the 19th century, nations themselves were brands on a global balance sheet. Wars, colonization, and railroads, all financed by bonds. Every government became a debtor, every citizen a taxpayer guaranteeing the interest. When a bond was issued, the bankers gained not just repayment, but power over policy, because whoever holds the debt writes the rules. Think of 1815. Napoleon is defeated, Europe is in ruins, and the Rothschild network finances reconstruction, not out of charity, but through a continent-sized loan book. Or 1914, the Great War begins, and once again, credit decides destiny. By 1918, Britain owes over £7 billion, 10 times its pre-war debt. America, the latecomer, becomes the creditor to them all. That's when the axis of power quietly tilts from London to New York. The same pattern repeats. The crisis justifies the borrowing. The borrowing justifies control. The names change, Bank of England, Federal Reserve, IMF, but the logic stays the same. Whoever issues the money decides the laws of scarcity. When the Federal Reserve was founded in 1913, it was sold as a public stabilizer. In reality, it formalized a private alliance between the U.S. Treasury and the major banks, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Kuhn Loeb. They designed a closed circuit. Banks could create credit, governments could borrow it, and citizens would repay it through taxes and inflation. It was elegant, almost artistic. The state got unlimited funding, the bankers got perpetual interest, the people got prosperity, as long as they didn't ask where it came from. But every machine of control needs a myth, and the myth was growth. If credit kept expanding, the system worked. If it stopped, the illusion cracked. So they built it to grow or die. From that seed, planted in 1694, patented in 1913, everything that followed was inevitable. Booms, crashes, wars, bailouts. The architecture was complete long before anyone realized it wasn't an economy at all. It was a loop. We live inside that loop today, a structure built not to serve production, but to harvest obligation. And like all empires before it, it survives by convincing you that the cage is safety. If this made you see the birth of money differently, write in the comments. Do you think control began with paper or with trust? After 1945, the world looked free, but it wasn't. The war had ended, yet a new empire had risen quietly, not from armies, but from ledgers. The United States held 2/3 of the world's gold, half its industrial capacity, and, most importantly, the power to issue the new world currency. Bretton Woods, 1944. In a luxury hotel in New Hampshire, 44 nations gathered to rebuild the post-war order. The official story says they wanted stability. The real story, they wanted control. Out of that meeting came the IMF, the World Bank, and a fixed exchange system. Every currency tied to the dollar, and the dollar tied to gold. Only one problem. It was a promise, not a law. The gold was real, the dollars were not. For 25 years, the illusion worked perfectly. Factories boomed, wages rose, families bought homes, and televisions showed an endless commercial of progress. America printed, the world borrowed, and everyone believed the green paper was as good as gold. Paris, Tokyo, London all held US dollars as reserves, never asking to convert them. Why would they? The system seemed eternal. This was the age of confidence, when debt was called growth and consumption replaced production as the engine of prosperity. Central banks expanded balance sheets, corporations issued bonds, and citizens took mortgages. Money flowed like water, but it wasn't wealth. It was credit dressed as abundance. Every car on the highway, every suburb on a former field, every imported product paid not with savings, but with tomorrow's promises. The mathematics, though, never stopped ticking beneath the celebration. By the 1960s, the United States was running deficits. Vietnam, space race, welfare programs, spending far more than it earned. Yet the dollar remained as good as gold because the world agreed to believe it. France's Charles de Gaulle was among the first to call the bluff. In 1965, he demanded real gold for France's dollar holdings. Other nations began to whisper the same question. What if there isn't enough gold? There wasn't. But the illusion held for a few more years because illusions are profitable. The system needed faith, and faith needs television, economists, and the word progress. As long as people bought the dream, the arithmetic could wait. It's the same psychology as a Ponzi scheme with better suits. When everyone gains, no one asks where the money comes from. When credit expands, optimism feels like reality. And here's the paradox. This golden age was real for millions. Lives improved, technology advanced, poverty fell, but all built on the leverage of future debt. The very mechanism that seemed to free humanity was already preparing its collapse. They called it prosperity. It was leverage disguised as freedom. When numbers grow faster than the metal, the truth eventually surfaces. Arithmetic doesn't forgive illusions. If this made you rethink what growth really means, write in the comments. When do you think the dream started cracking? With gold or with faith? It didn't end with a war or a coup. It ended with a television speech, August 15, 1971. The evening when Richard Nixon looked into the camera and told the world, calmly, that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. That single phrase, temporarily suspend, was the quiet death of the old monetary world. It has never been undone. From that night on, the global economy entered an experiment with no precedent: money without anchor. For centuries, gold had been the final judge. You could lie to the public, not to the math. Now, even arithmetic was negotiable. The dollar, once a receipt for gold, became a symbol backed only by confidence in military might. The global reserve currency no longer needed to represent anything. It simply was. At first, few understood the scale of what had just happened. Economists called it the end of Bretton Woods. But what really ended was accountability. Nations could now print their way out of debt, and for the first time in history, every currency floated against every other, a world of paper ships without anchor. The 1970s became a laboratory of chaos. Oil prices quadrupled, inflation soared, savings evaporated. Ordinary people saw the silent tax of devaluation, but couldn't name it. They blamed politicians, unions, greed. The real culprit was systemic arithmetic, more dollars chasing the same goods. The supply of money had broken loose from the supply of value. Meanwhile, the system's architects adapted brilliantly. The same mechanism that once chained gold to currency now chained debt to desire. Banks discovered they could manufacture credit endlessly: mortgages, corporate bonds, derivatives. The illusion shifted from gold-backed money to growth-backed credit. You didn't need gold anymore. You needed believers. And governments became the chief believers. After the 1970s came the 1980s, Reagan, Thatcher, deregulation. Credit was no longer suspicious, it was patriotic. Financial markets became the new factories. Instead of steel, they produced derivatives. Instead of ships, they exported debt. It looked like innovation, but it was leverage, polished, digitized, and rebranded as prosperity. By the 1990s, the system had reinvented itself fully. The Cold War ended, but the real empire, the dollar, ruled untouched. Nations might fall, currencies might crash, but the architecture of credit survived every disaster. And every time a bubble burst, 1987, 1998, 2008, the cure was the same: more of the poison. Cut rates, print liquidity, save the system, no matter the cost. Each rescue fed the next collapse. The mathematics became unmanageable, but the illusion had to persist because the alternative was to admit the truth, that the numbers could never be repaid. The gold standard died in 1971. What replaced it was the faith standard, and faith, unlike metal, can be printed infinitely until it can't. When you hear that the market recovered, remember, markets don't recover from arithmetic, they just redefine it. If this opened your eyes to how 1971 reshaped everything, comment 1971 so others see where the modern illusion began. If you're hearing this in 2025, understand this: the system that was born in 1694, exposed in 1971, didn't die. It evolved. It put on a new face: digital, cashless, frictionless. But underneath, the same mechanism hums: debt as money, credit as control, and scarcity by design. After the 2008 crisis, central banks promised reform. Never again, they said, as they printed trillions of dollars, euros, and yen to stabilize markets. But stabilization was just a euphemism for resurrection of the same system that caused the collapse. The money created didn't rebuild industry or infrastructure, it rebuilt balance sheets. Banks, hedge funds, and asset managers received the new lifeblood, not workers. The rich got liquidity, everyone else got austerity. Look around. What used to be the gold standard of wealth, a house, a pension, a saving account, has turned into a liability. Your savings lose value by the day, while asset prices inflate beyond reach. It's not a bug, it's the feature. When money is created as debt, someone must always owe more tomorrow than exists today. That's why inflation never truly disappears. It's not about rising prices, it's about shifting ownership. And the technology that promised freedom, the internet, digital payments, crypto, has been absorbed into the same architecture. Every transaction now passes through a monitored pipeline. You don't carry money anymore, you rent access to it. Cards, apps, even so-called digital wallets all depend on permission. Miss one tax, one compliance form, one line of code, and the faucet closes. The newest experiment? Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Sold as innovation, designed as consolidation. Every digital dollar or euro will be traceable, programmable, and, if necessary, expirable. Imagine a currency that knows where you spend it, when you save it, and whether you're allowed to use it. They call it modernization. It's the final stage of monetized control. But history rhymes. We've seen this before. The French revolutionaries printed assignats in 1790 promising equality. They got hyperinflation and tyranny. The Weimar Republic printed marks to feed its people. It got ruin and dictatorship. The mechanism is always the same. When governments can print at will, they inevitably print obedience. Today's financial elites don't need armies or colonies. The colony is debt itself. The frontier is psychological. Every paycheck, every subscription, every mortgage binds you to a system that rewards compliance and punishes independence. They no longer need to confiscate your gold. They just devalue your digits. But something has changed. For the first time, ordinary people can see behind the curtain. Cryptography, decentralized ledgers, alternative stores of value, they expose what was hidden, that money is just a protocol, and protocols can be rewritten. The monopoly of creation is cracking. The same internet that once enslaved data might yet liberate value. They built a system you could never escape. Until now. Because now you can see the architecture. And when people understand the design, the spell begins to break. Arithmetic doesn't lie, and neither does awareness. If this helped you see the modern economy for what it truly is, comment, "I see the system." Every empire believed it would last forever. Rome had its legions. Britain had its fleets. Ours has spreadsheets, invisible armies of digits enforcing obedience more efficiently than swords ever could. But all systems share one fatal weakness. When belief fades, the numbers stop adding up. You live in a time when that faith is cracking. The headlines say markets are strong, inflation is under control, growth is returning, but underneath, everyone feels the quiet panic that nothing solid remains. Because how can trust survive in a world where value is printed, rules are rewritten, and truth itself is adjustable? Arithmetic is the final truth teller. It doesn't care about ideology, technology, or empire. When claims outgrow reality, collapse is not a question of if, but when. Gold, oil, food, labor, energy, these are the real currencies. Everything else is belief, and belief is fragile. Yet collapse is not only destruction, it's revelation. When illusions die, the real becomes visible again. You begin to see what was always there, that wealth isn't paper or digits, but time, energy, skill, community, that money was only ever a reflection of trust, and when trust is stolen, creation itself rebels. They designed a system you could never escape, until now. Because now the cracks are open wide enough to see the machinery. Digital control and centralized issuance were meant to perfect obedience, but instead they exposed the design. People are remembering something older than credit. Exchange based on value, not permission. Cooperation, not coercion. Freedom doesn't begin with rebellion. It begins with understanding. Once you see the equation that your labor feeds their leverage, you start to act differently. You save differently, spend differently, think differently. You realize that opting out isn't an act of violence, but of arithmetic. Systems collapse when they run out of trust. Empires fall when numbers outgrow meaning. But truth, the balance between effort and reward, between real work and real value, always reemerges. Arithmetic cannot be deceived. It can only be delayed. If this made you question the story you were born into, share it. Because the first step out of any system is knowing you're inside one.